Hello, everyone. It's Larry Kotlikoff. I'm delighted to be here back on Economics Matters. I have a special guest today, Adam Garfinkle, who is one of our leading public intellectuals and international affairs experts. Let me just give you a little bit of Adam's background, and then I'm going to ask him to fill in. So he's an American historian and political scientist by training. He's the founding editor of the American Interest, which is a bi-monthly public policy magazine. He was previously editor of the National Interest, a very famous periodical. He's been a university teacher and a staff member at the highest levels of the U.S. government. He was a speechwriter to Secretary of State Colin Powell and a speechwriter to Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice. He was, as I mentioned, editor of the National Interest and then American Interest. And some of the people that co-founded the American Interest are Francis Fukuyama, Eliot Cohen, Zbigniew Brzezinski. You'll have to pronounce that better for me. Yeah, Brzezinski. I had a hard enough time with his last name, let alone his first name. Josef Joffe and Ruth Wedgwood. These are very famous people in the world of international affairs. So welcome, Adam. Great to have you. These are very interesting times. We're going to be talking right off the bat about the fact that the U.S. today could not find get its act together to agree to pass a resolution with the G7 that Russia had indeed invaded and had been the aggressor in this war against Ukraine. So we're sitting here at a time where it feels like it's 1939 and there's a Molotov and who was the Russian?
Von Ribbentrop, yeah, the German.
Von Ribbentrop and Molotov formed the Nazi Soviet pact to basically divide up Poland, and that worked just as long as it did before Russia invaded Germany in, I guess, 41. So
Other way around.
yeah.
Operation Barbarossa, the Germans invaded the Soviet Union.
Oh,
This is all a bunch of history, you know.
yeah. Did I say that? I said it the wrong way? Okay, yeah. Not invaded.
Okay.
Yeah, but tell us a little bit more about Adam Garfinkle before we get into this stuff, okay?
Okay, well, I'll try. It's true, as you said, that I did write speeches for Colin Powell and then a couple of speeches for Condoleezza Rice. And that might lead people to think that I have been, or was at the time, a Republican, but that's not true. I've never been a Republican. In the late 1970s, I worked for Scoop Jackson, who was a Cold War hawk, but who had a 100% ADA rating on labor, environment, and the rest. So I'm kind of an oddball. I've never been a Republican. My father was a member of the Teamsters Union. I've always been, fundamentally pro-labor in my domestic politics, pro-little guy. I've always been suspicious of concentrations of power, whether they're public or private, because they're always abused when they're concentrated. So I've been a fan of subsidiarity, and I've been a fan of common sense, basically. And I am, I guess I was affected by E.F. Schumacher and others back in the day when we were, in college and so forth, to beware of anything that wildly exceeds human scale, because it has a tendency to get out of hand, or needs pretty acute management strategies to keep it from getting out of hand. Let's put it that way. So I'm a little bit hard to define. I've always been a kind of selective engagement hawk when it comes to foreign policy stuff, at least during the Cold War, right? When there was a certain kind of adversary. I've been a little, but I've never been a Republican, and I've never been sympathetic to the Republican domestic political way of thinking. I didn't vote for Ronald Reagan. I've never gotten along with my more conservative colleagues who think that Ronald Reagan was the best thing since sliced bread. I never believed that. So I kind of don't fit, and that because we together tried some years ago to help launch a third party. neither Republican nor Democrat anymore. I was a Democrat until 1991, really. And that's when Sam Nunn, who I looked up to, because he and Scoop were good friends, that's when he refused to support, forced to kick the Iraqis out of Kuwait in 1991. And that was the last straw. I mean, I stuck with these people all through George McGovern's, Come Home America, which is now coming true, ironically, from right-wing isolationists. I stuck with the Democrats all that time until finally I just couldn't do it anymore. So I've been without a party for since 1991,
Okay, but before we get into the politics, okay, you've established your bona fides as neither a Republican nor a Democrat, as an independent thinker. But you started out, where were you born? And
I was born in Washington, D.C., under the Truman constellation.
what did your folks do?
My father never made it out of fifth grade. He was when the time I was born, he worked for Seal Test Dairy, which, for anybody who knows Washington, D.C., used to be down right across from Rock Creek Park between M and L Street, around 26th Street. He was a laborer. Before that, he had several stores, all of which failed. He never read a book in his life, was functionally illiterate in every language that he was supposed to have learned. My mother worked for the Treasury Department during World War II. But she, after she got married to my father in 1950, she didn't work anymore. So big family, all from Washington. My father had 9 siblings. My mother had 6 siblings. And I've got a buttload of cousins because of that. So it's
Are you an only child, or do you have any siblings?
I am an only child, yes.
So
I'm a child of my parents' old age. My father was 46 when I was born. My mother was almost 44.
okay, that's interesting. And you end up going to public school in Washington, and then you go to
My father moved out to Virginia, so I went to public school in Arlington. I am a graduate of Yorktown High School, which is a high school that a lot of interesting people graduated from, including the guy who started Google. What's his name? Schultz? No, yeah. And
you think about Schmidt, or you think
Schmidt? Yeah, that's right, Schmidt.
Eric Schmidt, yeah.
And when you get to our age, just kind of forget names sometimes. And Rich Lowry, who still edits National Review for what that's worth. A lot of fairly well-known. One of the Katie Couric, I think, went to Yorktown. It's one of those suburban places where a lot of people who work for the government and media and all that live in Arlington. So that's a high school that attracts a lot of those people. John Glenn and Annie Glenn lived in the neighborhood when I went to Williamsburg Junior High School. Everybody knew where their house was. He was famous. That was cool.
Did you actually meet him?
I never met him, but I knew where the house was. He had kids, and they weren't my age, but I knew who they were.
And so then you go to Penn for college, right?
I went to Penn for all 3 degrees.
You and I overlapped. The 3 degree. You got a BA in
BA and MA. I got the BA and the MA at the same time. Penn used to have a thing called submatriculation, and in the day, you could take graduate courses before you got your BA, and if you held off on your distributional requirements long enough, you could get both degrees simultaneously, and that way you could get a master's degree without having to be exposed to the draft right away. So that's what I did. And then I went to work for the Foreign Policy Research Institute for a short time, and then the institute people there got me into the PhD program in international relations. So I'm not really an historian or a political scientist exactly. My degree is in IR, for what that's worth. But the IR degree at Penn was a really interesting kind of degree, as you probably know. It was interdisciplinary. So you could take courses from just about any department in the university that you wanted to. So I created an interdisciplinary major that I think has held me in very good stead. I took a lot of philosophy courses, a lot of courses from a wonderful department at Penn called the History and Sociology of Science, a lot of anthro courses, lots of anthro courses. I think I got a great education largely by staying away from the political science department at Penn back in those days.
That was I took one class in political science at Penn. So we probably overlapped 3 years, and I hated it. And I got the guy said at the time things are quite overly liberal. He said, none of you guys have to show up to class because you're all going to get an A no matter what you do. So of course,
I don't know who
I,
that was.
being the good economist, I went to a couple of the classes, listened, decided there was content free, and went back to working my 40-hour week job,
Yeah.
printing posters, anti-war posters in the poster shop in Houston Hall.
It was a pretty weird time. It was pretty
Yeah.
lax in a lot of ways. But if you wanted to get a good education, Penn was a great place to do it. You just had to be self-motivated. So I would sit in on Lauren Isley lectures. I never took a class from Lauren Isley, but I would sit in on his when he spoke. I never was able to take a course with Philip Reef because you had to be if you were going to be in his graduate seminar on sociology, you had to be devoted to sociology, but I went and met him anyway. I never got to take a course with Irving Goffman because he didn't come to Penn from Berkeley until after I finished my classes, my doctoral classes. But I got to know him very well, and he was my mentor, and he was on my doctoral committee. So you could find the people that you admired and that you wanted to learn from, and you could learn from them.
This is a good lesson for
Use the
everybody.
university. You could use the university
Yeah.
in a slightly unconventional way and get a very fine education. If you just did what everybody else did, well, then, whatever.
Yeah. This is especially a good lesson for people that are younger, parents who have younger kids who are starting out to college, because April's coming up where they have to decide where to go. And I've seen so many we have in our economics department at Boston University, we're about 10th best, 11th best in the country, in the world, I guess, by ranking. Uh, and you have all these students who go through our program and they take lecturers and grad students, and they don't take the regular faculty. All they have to do is spend 10 minutes looking at publications uh, and see who's actually got, the top faculty in the department. There's 35 of them, basically. And we have a very big group of other people that teach. So you absolutely have to make sure that your tuition dollar is being well spent. And as you said, you can sit in on classes that you're not registered for. Just go talk to the teacher. If they're not a total jerk, they're going to let you sit in,
Yeah.
and they're going to have coffee with you afterwards. But anyway, Adam, let's talk about uh, whether we have Nazis taking over our government. We have Steve Bannon out there practicing his Nazi salute, swearing it's not a Nazi salute, just a greeting.
Not Steve Bannon. That's Elon Musk doing that, not Bannon.
No,
I think we do that.
Bannon did it as well.
Did he?
That was reported today. Yeah.
News to me.
Yeah. He wants to make sure his salute is as good as Musk's. And Musk is also making the face. He's pretending he's Hitler, I guess. I guess the question is, what is going on here? Do you think? I mean, for a lot of people, we suppose that this was all Trump trying to get some good positioning with respect to Russia, so he could then get them to agree to save face for Russia, and then get pressure Zelensky to make a deal that Zelensky could then say, I was forced into this. But the way he's going, that would be the rational explanation for what he's up to. On the other hand, he seems to be just mimicking what Putin would otherwise be saying, or what Putin has said in the past. So it seems like he might be a full Russian agent in terms of his actual practices, if not his formal pay, where his pay is coming from. What do you think is going on here?
It's just since between the 12th and the 16th of this month, starting in Brussels with Secretary Hegseth's speech to the Ukraine Defense Contact Group, and then Vice President Vance's speech to the Munich Security Conference, and then President's telephone call to Putin that nobody was warned about beforehand, and then there's these talks in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, that didn't include the Ukrainians, and all the other stuff that's gone on since January 20th, with the Hitler Gruza and all that. It's kind of like, trying to pick out individual drops in a fire hose torrent, aimed at your head. It's very, very hard to make heads or tails of it. But I've been trying to write a book on what I call the age of spectacle. I've been at this now for a couple of years, and I'm just about finished. As you probably know, I've been rolling it out on my Substack, And this coming Friday, just in a few days, will be the last part of it. Number 45 out of 45 parts of it. And
let's advertise your Substack for a second. What's
it's called the Raspberry Patch, you know.
And I recommend it. Everybody just go to substack.com and look for the Raspberry
for
Patch.
Adam Garfinkle, the Raspberry Patch, and it'll pop right up. And subscriptions are mostly free. I've started to do some stuff behind a paywall, but I haven't done that much yet, and I don't know if I will. But it's called the Raspberry Patch. Most of it, I started it on January 4th last year, so it's only been in existence for about 13 months, and most of it has been the rollout piece by piece of this manuscript, this Age of Spectacle manuscript. And the subtitle of the book, I think, would give people a pretty good idea of the complex sort of synoptic argument, everything bagel argument I'm trying to make, which is how fragilized affluence, the end of modernity, the erosion of deep literacy, and shock entertainment tech novelty has wrecked American politics. It's all those things. It isn't just one thing. And Trump is a symptom as well as a subsequent accelerator of this descent into surreality that American politics have fallen into. So it's not, to me, it's interesting to look at the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact of 1939. It's interesting to look at even more interesting is if you compare J.D. Vance's speech in Munich to the stuff that Carl Schmitt was writing as the Nazi ideologue during the Weimar Republic, there are some similarities that absolutely jump at you with all four paws and connect to your face and will not let go. The Nazis, after the beer hall putsch in Munich, the failed putsch in 1923, the Nazis were first and foremost in the Weimar period in standing up for the mechanisms of democracy in the Weimar Republic, and they learned how to take advantage and pollute each and every one of them. And so Carl Schmitt, who was the ideologue of the party in those days, basically argued that liberal democracy, guardian democracy with there wasn't a mob, right, of the sort that a Republican democracy wasn't really a democracy because it got in the way of the unity of the people with the leader. And multiculturalism and human rights and all of these things were really pollutants to the idea of a true democracy. And so really what Schmitt tried to do was turn the idea of a liberal democracy and say that wasn't really a democracy, it's a mobocracy with a leader. That's a real democracy. That involves the unity of the people, the Volk, with the leader. Okay, and there's a Musk put a tweet on X just the other day that said basically the same thing. He said, sure, everybody should defer to the president because the president is the elected representative of the people, and that makes it a democracy. Otherwise, it's a bureaucracy. He didn't mention the Congress, didn't mention the judiciary, didn't mention checks and balances, didn't mention the separation of powers. I mean, this is exactly, he and Vance are channeling Carl Schmitt 100%. Now, does that mean that Trump is Hitler? I don't think Trump is serious enough to be Hitler or any fascist. Trump is a man, he's a gangster, right? He's got a mafiosa kind of a mind, the mind of a 9-year-old. He's mentally ill. He's a 9-year-old malignant narcissist. He thinks exclusively in zero-sum terms. He cannot imagine a positive sum outcome at all. He always punches down, both domestically and in foreign policy, which you can see Ukraine, he's punching down. He's punching down at the NATO allies as well, punching down at Canada, punching down at Denmark, punching down at Panama. This is his personality, right? So, so the question then becomes not, it's not about Donald Trump having, personality deformity. He does, it's clear. And every psychiatrist in the world looking at this guy knows this. The real question is, how could the American people have elected him, not once, but twice? And that is what I hope that my book can explain. Every American who sees Donald Trump and who sees Elon Musk and who sees J.D. Vance and who sees all of these guys, right, are seeing them on screens. They're seeing them on a TV screen. They're seeing them on a smartphone screen. They're seeing them on a tablet screen. They're seeing them on some kind of a screen. And it's very important to understand that a screen is a two-dimensional thing. It's not a three-dimensional thing. Seeing somebody on a screen is like watching reality TV. And politics has become a form of entertainment. There was a poll, I guess about 3 weeks ago, that showed that Trump now has 50% or a bit over popularity rating. That's the highest rating he's ever had, including going back to the beginning of his first term, right? How do you explain that? Well, some people started to ask the people who were interviewed, why they liked Trump, why they were popular with him, and the overwhelming answer was, well, at least he's doing something. All right. This is what you're seeing is deliberate spectacle. They called it shock and awe. This is a spectacleized presentation. It's a show. It's meant to be entertaining. It's meant to be enrapturing. It's meant to be mesmerizing, the same way that an exciting sitcom or adventure movie or Marvel, superhero thing. It's basically it's all about television. The first Trump administration was essentially a reality TV phenomenon. This is far, far more so, because they've had 4 years to hone this, and there are no normies anymore among the Republicans to say, wait a minute, this doesn't make any sense. So, yeah, I mean, there are elements of the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact in the deal with the Russians at the expense of Ukraine, a kind of a gang up on Ukraine, to colonize the country, basically. But unless you understand how surreal things have become, how surreal the audience has become, we the people, the demos, a lot of people in this country, especially those who don't read, are living in a kind of an alternate universe. And the only way to appreciate this is to stand back just a little bit and recognize one key fact about this whole lunatic phenomenon, which is it's all based on a wild ass lie. All right. It's based on a twin lie, the lie that the 2020 election was stolen and that Biden was never a legitimate president, and that what happened on January 6, 2021 wasn't an insurrection, but it was some sort of, patriotic uprising against this stolen. This is a colossal lie. This is a lie so outrageous and so thin in terms of evidence, something that's never happened in American history, and yet that won a plurality of people who cast votes on November 5th. When you think about that, right, you realize just how completely abnormal this is. And in terms of American history, and everybody in Europe, everybody with a brain in Europe, Western Europe, Central Europe, Eastern Europe, knows who started the war in February 2022. They know who the dictator is. They know who the victims of. Everybody knows this. You mentioned the G7 meeting, right? Everybody knows this. But there are Americans don't care much about foreign policy unless body bags are coming home, or they think somebody's reaching in their pocket to take their money. But that's not true the other way around. America is the most important bilateral relationship for many, many, many countries in the world. So they know a lot about us. They care a lot about us. We don't know a lot about them or care a lot about them. So this asymmetry helps explain what you mentioned before. How in the world can everybody in Europe with a brain know the truth about this, and yet the Americans come in and somersault reality, which is, of course, the same thing that they did with the 2020 election and the January 6, 2021 insurrection. This is nutty stuff. Nutty.
So Adam, where do you see this going? It looks like, it obviously it's going the wrong way, but do you really, I mean, does it look like, do you think Trump will pull out of Europe? He said just yesterday he was going to keep the troops in Poland. Do you think there's some, you think he's going to pull out?
I'm not sure what's going to happen, but here are a couple of pertinent facts. Hickseth said in Brussels that, there would be no Ukraine in NATO, but not for the right reasons, for the wrong reasons. There would be no troops on the ground in any post-deal security arrangement for Ukraine. At the body language, though, of the whole thing was that there's really no Article 5 guarantee anymore, period, ever. And we all remember from the first term that Trump, because he doesn't understand what NATO really is anyway, wanted to leave the alliance because he has a very narrow green eye shade sort of way of looking at it. He thinks there's a barrel into which Europeans put money so that we protect them. It's a protection arrangement, just like a mafioso arrangement. That's what Trump understands from New York City real estate dealings and from all the gangster movies he's watched and enjoyed over the years. He doesn't understand what a collective security arrangement like NATO even is, because it's a positive sum arrangement. And he doesn't understand positive sum arrangements, only zero sum, winner and loser, might makes right, law of the jungle. That's all he knows. All right. So he never really understood it. Um, and so when he says there are some people who think, well, okay, the Allies, as they scramble in the presumed wake of a deal over Ukraine, as they scramble to put together a defensive deterrent shield against the recrudescence of the war, right? We've said we won't have your back for that. There's no Article 5 guarantee for that. But that's okay, some people say, because NATO's not part of, Ukraine's not part of NATO. But if the Russians invaded Latvia, let's say, Latvia is a NATO member, that would mean NATO was at war with Russia. And then the Article 5 guarantee would apply. I don't think so. Friedrich Merz, who just got elected Chancellor of Germany, he doesn't think so either. Nobody thinks so. I mean, this is not just abandoning Ukraine. This is joining with Russia to carve it up, basically. So this is not that simple. I don't think anybody would believe an Article 5 guarantee from the United States. Nobody.
So we get the rare earths, and Russia gets the eastern part.
Yeah, and then we'll see what happens later. Here's something interesting. You mentioned 1939 is an interesting year. Molotov, von Ribbentrop. So if you were Putin, and if the West buys this deal, whatever it is, and it will result in the Belarusianization of Ukraine, it'll still be on the map. There'll still be lines on the map, but it won't be really sovereign. It'll be like Belarus is, right? And the Europeans will go, oh well, that's that. And now we have a deal, and the Russians have promised they won't do anything more, and that's a lie. And as soon as the European demobilize themselves and stop spending money, stop increasing their spending on security, the Russians will start the war again to complete the subjugation of Ukraine. And they may not stop there. It all depends on what the Europeans can gather themselves to do. But if you were a Russian planner, if you were Putin's age 72, he's younger than we are a little bit. Or you were a military planner working for Putin, and you were contemplating your next move, what would it be? Well, all you got to do is look at a map. All right.
Latvia.
No, not Latvia. I don't think so. You could take care of Latvia another way. You attack Latvia, you're at war with NATO. If you're going to be at war with NATO, you might as well go for a higher, more valuable geopolitical stake. The higher geopolitical stake is the so-called Suwalki corridor. The Suwalki corridor divides Belarus and Russia from Kaliningrad. Right? Kaliningrad has no contiguous land border with the rest of Russia. Now, this goes back to 1939. It goes back before. What is Kaliningrad? It's East Prussia. It's what East Prussia used to be.
For everybody who's not familiar, there's a part of Germany, or what used to be Germany and used to be Poland, at the northeastern part of Germany. There's an area which is actually Russian territory, right smack dab between Germany and Poland. And
that's right. It used to be, back after World War I, there was a so-called Danzig corridor, right? So Polish territory, there was a piece of Germany on the eastern side of a lot of pieces of Poland. So to get from Germany to Danzig, there was this corridor. So now the whole thing has kind of moved to the east a little bit. So Kaliningrad is a vulnerability to the Russian military. Kaliningrad can be surrounded by NATO forces. It could have been NATO forces in the United States, and it could have been blockaded and strangled. So if you're a Russian military planner, you want to eliminate that possibility. You want to join up the border between Russia, Belarus, and Kaliningrad. How can you do that? If you look at the map, there's a line that leads from Belarus to Kaliningrad. North of the line is Lithuanian territory. And on the edge of it is a town called Klaipėda, which used to be Memel, another German territory before World War I. Very interesting history about Memel. It's now part of Lithuania, but south of that line is Poland. Okay, so the Russians could go north of that line, and they could take Lithuanian territory and join it up with Kaliningrad, or they could go south and go through Polish territory and link up Kaliningrad with the rest of Russia, or they could do both. Doesn't matter, because either way, Lithuania would be cut off from any land contiguity with any other NATO country. And because of that, Latvia and Estonia to its north would be cut off from any land contiguity to Poland. And they would have to communicate with the rest of NATO to Donetsk by sea, by air. Their land links to any other NATO country would be severed.
Doesn't this mean Poland and Latvia go to war with Russia? And
Absolutely.
NATO gets triggered. So you're talking about World War III here happening.
Well, the question is, what would the Europeans do? What would the rest of the Europeans do? Right? Look, France and Britain have nuclear weapons. Unfortunately, they aren't having many weapons, very many nuclear weapons. All these years, the French and British nuclear arsenals were meant as force de frappe, kind of bee stings. So in case the Russians thought they were going to attack them, they could hurt them back, right? But the number of weapons that the French and the British have, nuclear weapons, are not sufficient for deterrence. Without the United States, they are not sufficient for deterrence. And
Russia only has
we
one, two
have to
big.
build more nuclear weapons. So
Let's talk about that for a second. I mean, Russia has two big cities. It's enough to take out those two big cities, St.
it's true.
Petersburg and Moscow. And is it possible? I mean, there is a nuclear plant with a lot of, from my understand, spent fuel rods on the ground about 150 kilometers north of Moscow. Is it possible that even Estonia and Latvia have in effect a dirty bomb by just taking drones or whatever? And
I don't know. Maybe. I mean, there are all kinds of, I'm not a military expert in that regard. So I don't know about the details. All I know is that if the Russians try to link up Kaliningrad to the rest of the territorial Russia, Belarus, it all depends on what the Europeans do. They may back down. All right. If they back down, that's the end of NATO, and that's the end of European, um, or they may not back down, but they may fight ineffectively. Or I think quite possibly they could defeat the Russians. They could fight very effectively, but they have to start getting their act together right now, because we're not going to be there. That's the change here. We have overturned 80 years worth of American post-war foreign policy.
do the Europeans and the UK, do they have the military equipment to deal with Russia and the soldiers at this point, or do they need repair
It depends.
parts from Russia from the US?
It depends on the contingency. All right. What I just described, the kind of a quick attempt to link up Kaliningrad. Individually, the Europeans do have enough weapons and enough men to stop the Russians from doing that, but they have to concert it. They have to plan. They have to have interoperable communications technologies. They have to have an integrated C-cubed-I capability. They have to do some things in order to prepare themselves to stop it. But that kind of a military operation, they could stop. Yes, they could. The Russian military, for the past, since February 2022 until now, has been very ineffective. I mean, this is a huge force with, on paper, huge arsenal of weapons. And look what they've been able to achieve. Very, very little. They even let the Ukrainians invade parts of Russia near Kursk and hold it. This is not an effective military. All right. It's not 10 feet high. People who talk about, well, Russia's a big country. It has a huge defensive depth. They're trying to mobilize 1.5 million. That's all very true, right? That's probably going to wreck the Russian economy. We could wreck it a lot faster if we'd stop buying their energy. That's how they finance all this, we, the West in general, and the Indians. But Europe by itself,
and the Chinese,
Europe by itself has plenty of capacity, financial capacity, military capacity, technological capacity, intelligence capacity to defeat a Russian surge of that kind.
So if I'm Xi,
could it defeat a much larger operation, say aimed at Poland, a much more protracted operation that would take years and years? Maybe not. I don't know. I mean, the experts would not necessarily agree, but the kind of relatively isolated kind of operation that I'm describing, yeah, the Europeans could stop it if they got their act together. Without us, yeah, they could stop it, but they've got to get their act together.
I presume that's happening. I mean, yesterday we had the German election, and they have now a much more aggressive leader, and Metz.
I think the outcome of the German election was about as good as one could have expected under the circumstances. There's going to be now, all the people I know who are true experts on Germany are predicting that there will be a grand coalition, the CDU-SPD coalition. That's good, because what the Germans have to get rid of is this budget balance thing that Angela Merkel tied on them in 2009. It is largely what has caused the recession in Germany for the past 2 years. Germans are not investing in infrastructure or anything. And they need to understand that if they rev up their defense industries and they invest more in infrastructure, I mean, domestic infrastructure, that's going to stimulate their economy. And it's going to stimulate their economy in what they do best, which is the value-added stuff that they know how to do. They've been really silly from an economic point of view. I mean, one understands why the Germans think this way, and we know their history with inflation, but it really was kind of dumb what they've been up to and of course it's the budget the budget collision that brought down the Schultz government. So I think this new government will be less vulnerable to that, but they've got to get rid of this silly balanced budget obligation.
So let
And
me
they've got
ask
to do
you
something
this.
about immigration.
Let me ask you this. The Spanish, I think, Prime Minister was speaking, I think, just yesterday too, about forming closer ties with the Chinese, with Xi. Uh, if I'm Xi, or if you're Xi, would you start offering to sell the European NATO countries and the UK armaments, and start thinking about moving away from Russia and just have a complete global realignment? I just wrote about that in my Substack a couple of weeks ago, maybe a week ago. Europe and China versus the US and Russia. Is that where we could possibly end up?
I don't think so. I mean, the
Yep.
Europeans were enamored with the Chinese market, 4 or 5 years ago. Not so much for weapons, but just in general, because they're export-oriented, mercantilist-minded countries, most of them. In last couple of years, though, the Europeans have been a bit more skittish about the Chinese. Their investments haven't gone so well. Chinese have economic problems, largely having to do with the unevenness of economic growth in China, and the one-child policy now has created a huge number of old people that are going to be supported by too few younger people. Chinese have problems, and the Europeans have been leery.
Everybody has problems. Russia has problems. We have problems, but things are changing at lightning speed. And I don't know whether these bigger kind of mega problems are going to keep, uh, the earthquake from continuing. Uh,
I don't know. Here's one thing that is important in terms of the military side. One of the Europeans in the United States have been in a symbiotic relationship of several that has several dimensions. One of them has to do with major platforms, major weapons platforms. They're very expensive to build nowadays. They require huge capital infusions to build them. So what we've done is we've gotten pre-order guaranteed export markets, so that we can do the best that our engineers and technologists can give us the best major platforms by pre-selling a number of items to the Europeans and to others, some of the Middle East, elsewhere. Why would the Europeans continue to do that? Why would they continue to engage in this symbiotic relationship unless they had to, when we have made common cause with their adversaries, with the Russians? So yeah, I could imagine circumstances, depending on the nature of the technology, I could imagine circumstances where they would try to make deals with the Chinese at some point. What they really need to do is integrate their defense industries, which they have never done properly, to be able to make this stuff themselves. And they can do it. And by the way, the addition of Sweden to NATO, which was caused by Putin's invasion, the Swedes bring a lot to the table in terms of technical, scientific, and engineering expertise. It's a small country. There aren't that many Swedes, but man, they're really good at this stuff. And they up the game of Europe if the Europeans can get their act together. So there's a lot of hope here, seems to me, in looking ahead. But the question is, how much time do the Europeans have to do this?
so things have already moved at lightning speed in a month from Trump
No,
taking
that's
off.
right. But Putin whacked Crimea in 2014. It took him 8 years to take the next step. 8 years is a long time.
Right.
I mean, look, the Russian economy is semi-exhausted. The army, they've lost more people. They're more dead, not just wounded. The Russians have lost more dead already in this war than in all of World War II. It's
What?
just 100,
No, no.
more than 150,000 dead. So, and some
I
estimates have
thought they lost 20 million people in World War II. What do you mean?
I mean, I'm not talking about all people, just Russians. Just Russians.
Okay.
There's some estimates of casualties of men, having to leave the battlefield because they got shot up. It's something like 850,000, of which 150,000 or 200,000 are dead. Those are big numbers, right? So I mean,
This, well, let's go back to China. Seems like the perfect time to take over Taiwan. I mean,
well, that's right.
here you got Trump saying it's okay for us to take Greenland, Panama, Gaza,
Right,
Canada.
right.
Uh, it's okay for Russia to take Ukraine.
Yeah, what you're pointing to has been pointed out by many people in
Yeah,
the brains of what I call the maggots, right? M-A, capital A, capital M, capital A, capital G, capital small t, the maggots. In the
yeah.
brains of the maggots, they want the world to be a balance of power, spheres of influence, 19th century sort of arrangement, completely amoral, totally realpolitik, actually machtpolitik. That's what they see as the natural state of relations among different countries. And by the way, that corresponds to their vision of domestic society. Domestic society is all about winners and losers. It's all about oppressors and oppressed. They don't see, again, the possibility of positive sum relationships. They don't see the possibility of genuinely cooperative relationships. It's somebody wins and somebody loses. The same attitude that shapes their view of American domestic society, and domestic society shapes their view of international politics. So that's what they're thinking. So you're right. Here's the oddity. There are contradictions in the second Trump administration that are yet to be worked out. One of them is Hegseth said in Brussels. He said, "Well, the Europeans have to take care of themselves now, because we have two priorities in the United States. One is to protect our own borders, as if that's such a big deal militarily, and the other is China. And China," he said, "has both capabilities and the intent to assault the American homeland and core interests of the United States in the Asia Pacific." All right. So this is the China hawk kind of thing to say. Marco Rubio is known as a China hawk. Mike Waltz, the National Security Council Security, is known as they're China hawks all through this administration. But there are three kinds of China hawks.
Here in Navarro. Yeah.
Three kinds. They're the military guys, all right, who a lot of them really exaggerate dangerously the inevitability of a Sino-American war. A Sino-American war is only inevitable if we talk ourselves into one, right? At the same time, the president, like you say, is saying to Xi, go and take Taiwan. The only quality Taiwan has that has made it interesting is that it's a democracy. But Trump and the MAGAs don't give a shit about democracy, right? And otherwise, it's a strategic liability because of its geographical location. So as far as Trump's concerned, we don't care. So you have these China hawks talking about a war, but Trump's saying we're not going to start a war over Taiwan. And then you have a third group of China hawks who see the China threat solely in terms of science, technology, and economics, not in terms of geopolitics. So you've got these three different kinds of China hawks. And instead of creating a chorus, they create a cacophony. And the result is we don't really know how this administration's China policy is going to develop, because it's made up of separate strands, right? The same thing is true, by the way, internally. You've got Elon Musk and and Vance, and they are following the playbook or the manifesto of a book called The Sovereign Individual, written back in 1999. How to survive the collapse of the cyber world. Kind of, it's really a kind of a dystopian view of the international commerce and banking and finance and all that. It's get yours at any cost kind of thing. But they're following this playbook. It was written by a British ultra Tory whose name I can't remember at the moment. But what they want to do is they want to eviscerate the regulatory capacities of the federal government, and they're doing pretty good job of that, right? They're destroying the capability of monitoring, of regulating, of taxing. So this is Steve Bannon called this techno-anarchism. Bannon apparently hates Musk and really dumped on him in an interview just before the inauguration. He refers to this as techno-feudalism, which is a pretty good term for what it is. On the other hand, and that of course diminishes state power. But Trump, through Patel and Gabbard and Pam Bondi, they're militarizing the power ministries of the federal government, the Justice Department, the FBI, and that aggrandizes state power. So you've got, on the one hand, you've got part of the administration trying to eviscerate state power, and another part trying to aggrandize state power in the same building. Can these two tendencies cohabit for long? This never
I think
happened before. I don't know.
it seems like fascism, and this seems like
It's
Hitler,
corporatism.
Hitler spent, well, I don't know. I mean, it feels more like Hitler 33 taking a couple months to completely eliminate democracy and take over all power,
Yeah.
and then to declare himself the Fuhrer.
There's one other.
It strikes
What?
me that destroying everybody, destroying uh, the academy, which he's really trying to do by wiping out grants and overhead payments
Yeah.
to the point where, I have a neighbor who's got a $70 million grant from Brown to study Alzheimer's. Uh, she's thinking about selling her home because the she's not sure she's going to get paid. And uh, it's ridiculous. I mean, very, very competent member of the faculty at Brown running in large part this enormous grant, and it's not being funded. So we're going after people who have Alzheimer's. Uh, this is, I
Well, it's
don't
cruel.
know. Yeah, it's cruel and unusual, but it's also just making sure we're in power and everybody else is cowed. Nobody else can speak about these
Right.
people.
Right. Well, cruelty
But
is the point.
at the same time, with all this thing going on, if I'm Xi in China, I say this is just the perfect time before they get their act together to think about anything. I just take it over. I just do a blockade of Taiwan and say, surrender, guys. We're taking it over. This is our territory. And dare the US to sink a ship. And I just take it over. This is just the rule of the
It could
world
be.
these days.
And there's
Uh,
also a danger of North Korea invading or bombing South Korea. This is a point when, when the cat's away, the mice will play kind of thing. All kinds of this. Every time a great power recedes from a geopolitical area, and in this case, the United States, it's the whole world pretty much, a shadow belt of instability develops around it. When, for example, the Soviet Union fell and it broke into pieces, we saw a shadow belt of instability arise around what had been the Soviet Union. You see it in Ukraine still, Transnistria, saw it in the Balkans. This always happens when in the case of the United States, this is self-abnegation. It's not just a collapse for other reasons. It's a self-abnegation, pulling in. A couple of things I wanted to mention. It's not just the export of U.S. weapon systems to Europe that are likely to come to a halt at some point, but the whole basing structure in Europe and elsewhere. This administration, Hicks has sent a memo around to the heads of the combat arms services saying to them last week, expect 8% cuts in defense for 4 consecutive years, right? This is an isolationist administration.
or
They
is this,
don't want the global footprint that we have built. For example, most of our bases in Europe are not for Europe. They play a tripwire and a symbolic role, but most of the bases the United States has in Europe, it's a more convenient way to get to the Near East and South Asia, right? These guys don't want to go to the Near East and South Asia. They don't think we have any interests. That's somebody else's sphere of influence.
so
We
it
want to
all
be left
feels,
alone in our sphere of influence, which is going to include Greenland. This is nuts. It's nutty stuff. But
could it also be, I mean, this is extreme, but we were talking about extreme things that nobody would have remotely believed possible have happened in the last 30 days.
right.
Is it quite possible that Trump actually is a Russian agent? That
You
this,
know, people, just the other day, my friend Claire Belinsky in Paris um, um, cross-posted something from former KGB type who is now living in the West, and there is. I mean, it's hard to evaluate the credibility of all this, but back in the late 70s and early 80s, the Russians made KGB made a concerted effort to try to recruit a lot of American businessmen, and Trump allegedly was one of them. There's a lot of granularity to these reports, but it's also possible to fabricate granularity. So I don't know what to make.
I don't believe in conspiracy theories myself, but when you have a lot of evidence, when this is exactly what a Russian agent put into the place of position of president would want to do. I
That's
mean,
right. And it's not just Trump, it's Tulsi Gabbard, even more blatantly. Robert F. Kennedy in some respects. Even Patel has been associated with a Russian troll, movie making Russian troll. It's kind of a weird coincidence that all these people end up in the same place. So, there is smoke. The question is there fire? And I have an open mind about it. I really do. Trump, Trump was very sensitive in the first term when people conflated two separate things. One, that the Russians tried to influence the 2016 election, right? And second, that his campaign was somehow connected to Russian ops, one way or another. Those are two separate things. It's clear that the Russians tried to influence the election, and they might have succeeded. The second thing is, but when Trump heard the first accusation, he always conflated it with the second. Now, what does that tell you? Is that being a little bit too cute about perhaps being guilty of this? Sending Paul Manafort out to talk to Russians. I mean, I just don't know. I would not be shocked if this, a lot of people have said in the first term, the Russians must have something on him, either having to do with women or underage women or realism, who knows? But the Russians must have something on him for him to, act the way that he does. Other people say, no, it's just business interests, just money. All he cares about is money. I don't know.
how can you be, how old is he now? 79, 80? How can
78,
you,
I think, 78. Yeah.
how can you, I mean, obviously he's doing a lot of things to make money off of this presidency, selling coins and
Everything. Watches.
watches. Uh, at what point does this can't be just about making money. Maybe this is, he doesn't seem to like his kids all that much.
No, well, yeah,
Doesn't seem to, I don't know.
malignant narcissists have a lot of trouble loving anybody but themselves. And his niece Mary has attested that he's never really shown any tenderness or love for any of his wives or kids. This
Yeah.
is part of the personality disorder that he has. I don't hate Donald Trump. I think he needs a psychiatrist. But what
So
am I
how
going
far does this go? Let's just kind of bring this to a demoralizing close here. Uh, do we end up seeing retribution? He's everybody's retribution. I mean, I'm your retribution, he said in his campaign.
right?
And now he's got the Justice Department and the FBI set up to enact that retribution. Does that mean that people like you and I are rounded up? Does it mean that they go after Pelosi next?
I don't know about you. I don't know about you, but I don't think I'm important enough to get on their radar.
I don't think I'm important enough either.
Yeah. I haven't, as Jews need to know where their suitcases are. When you see anti-Semitism rising from the left and the right simultaneously, we've seen that movie before. We know how it ends. I know where my suitcases are. I don't think it's time to pull them out and dust them off and fill them yet. But it might become time to do that at some point. I just don't think it's yet. So I'm mindful of all this, but I don't think this is inevitable. I think that standing up to these people is possible. I wish the Democrats were a little bit better in understanding what an opposition party was. They seem to be kind of deer in the headlights, more or less. It's possible that the Republicans could piss off some of their own. Senator Tillis of North Carolina is in an outrageous roar over the Ukraine stuff. But these people are so frustrating. So in the Gabbard hearing and the Robert F. Kennedy hearing, Mitch McConnell was the only one who voted no among the Republican senators, right? So then look what happens. Along comes Patel, Murkowski, and Collins vote no, but Mitch McConnell votes yes. Obviously, they talked about this beforehand. Obviously, they're too afraid to tank one of the nominations. And all they were doing was posturing for their various constituencies. And it's just sickening to watch, really sickening. But the Democrats aren't much more fun to watch either, because they haven't figured out yet how to be an opposition party. They've been mute most of the time. I mean, the federal judiciary took a little while to get its gears moving to claim that this, that, and the other thing you've done is illegal. But I think what the administration is deliberately doing is orchestrating a confrontation with the Supreme Court. And because of the July 1st court decision on presidential immunity, they're pretty sure they're going to make that John Roberts will back down, and I think he will back down. And when that happens, then we are no longer a democracy. We are an autocracy. We do not have separation of powers anymore. We have only one branch of government that makes any difference, and that's the executive branch, and that's the president and his guys. If that happens, and when would that be? This year, right? Here's something else that I think people don't really realize. Some people are thinking, well, these guys, they're such clowns, and they don't know what, like Musk, he doesn't have any idea what he's doing. He's a ketamine freak. He doesn't know what he's doing. They're going to create a huge oppositional drag. That means that the 2026 midterms will be a Democratic romp. And then that will stop this craziness, and then we'll get back in balance somehow. You know, this is an illusion or a delusion. If the Democrats actually can run in free and fair elections in states with Republican governors, I will be surprised. And if they win anyway, we'll just see another stop the steal, another combination of radical lawfare with the intimidation of crowds. And by the way, the 1,600 January 6th jailed folks that Trump pardoned on his first day in office, that's the core of a paramilitary organization. Those are his brown shirts. So in 2026, I could easily see physical intimidation of any judge who actually tries to do his job properly. I don't think. I mean, there's Trump and his guys have a kind of a version of the Brezhnev doctrine, right? Once Russian, always Russian. Once MAGA, always MAGA. They have no intention of voluntarily handing over power to anybody else. None. The question is, can they get away with it? Well, we don't know yet, but we're about to find out, I think.
Well, on that happy note, let me thank you so much, Adam, and let's pray for our country. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks.